In the spring of 1665, at St. Giles in the Field, just outside of London, bubonic plague breaks out, leading to the Great Plague of 1665 to 1666. We're not entirely certain exactly how many people died, as some deaths weren't reported, and of those that were, some of the records were destroyed in the Great Fire of London in 1666. That said, we know it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 in 4, 1 in 3, 2 out of 5, something of this nature. If we just take 1 in 3 as an example, we can look at the prevalent theories of the day as to how the Great Plague was spread. Now, we know today that the Great Plague was spread by rats having the bubonic plague in their bloodstream, and when fleas bit them, they became infected, and when those same fleas bit humans, they effectively injected the bacterium into the human hosts. Of course, nothing was understood about germ theory in the 1660s. Germ theory would be a long way before it was even conceived of, let alone accepted. Nevertheless, there were theories abounding. Perhaps the most popular was the theory of the miasma. Now, when people die, they rot, and the smell is appalling. And with bubonic plague, the appalling smells begin before the person even dies. And so there was a connection between a bad smell and this terrible disease. This confusion between cause and effect led to the assumption that bad smells, or miasma, was the cause of bubonic plague. This is an example of anecdotal evidence gone wrong, but there was this anecdotal evidence. Now, one doctor in 1665 contracted bubonic plague and treated himself with the best treatments that he could think of the period, one of which was to take a desiccated toad and place it on his chest. Now, the reason for using this was quite logical to the 17th century mind. Toads were associated with being poisonous animals and therefore had an affinity for poison. The net result would be, if you place this desiccated toad on your chest, one on a necklace perhaps, it would draw the poison out of the body and into the toad, leading to a cure. Now, as we said before, 1 in 3 infected patients would die, but that still left people who survived. This particular doctor was one of the survivors. But using the anecdotal evidence of having placed the toad on his chest and having cured himself, so to speak, the anecdotal evidence was sufficient for him to declare that placing a desiccated toad on the chest or wearing a desiccated toad on a necklace in contact with the chest would be a good treatment. Now, this treatment was engaged by many thousands of people. And as we know today, it did nothing. And this is the problem with anecdotal evidence. It may imply something, but the inference may simply be coincidence. And relying on it is a mistake. The modern use of drugs such as Ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine to treat COVID-19 are rather like that desiccated toad, something which has been tried on some people who survived, but these were people who are always going to survive anyway. The actual numbers of survivors in any test group doesn't change. That some individuals were always going to survive does not mean that taking this particular treatment, which doesn't happen to work, was the cause. Thus we can see that treatments like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or desiccated toads, while superficially could be said to be potentially useful, as it was tried in a case, and in that particular instance, the sufferer survived and became well again. All that qualifies for is being anecdotal evidence. An anecdote is not sufficient, which is why modern medicine has progressed beyond that which we had in the 17th century, and today requires much more experimentation and trials on large groups of people. It is known, for example, that in the 21st century, the various vaccines created to combat COVID-19 in fact work, because not only are there survivors, but out of a particular sample size, there are far more survivors than when we compare them with sample sizes of the same numbers of people who haven't been vaccinated or who have tried other treatments. The fact that some individuals trying treatments that don't work survive, for example, by putting a desiccated toad on their chest, does not mean that that treatment works. There is some confusion about this because, of course, many people have never studied science, and if you haven't, you could well be forgiven for misunderstanding the relationship between an effective treatment and one that superficially, coincidentally worked on, or appeared to work, I should say, on a given occasion. I hope you found this interesting, entertaining, and most importantly, enlightening. If so, please click like, please consider subscribing, and do share this video. The more people who understand the fundamentals of science, the better off we will all be. Have a good one.